I walked out of the notary's office with a smile I had not felt in months, clutching the papers that meant freedom, security, and a fresh start. I thought today was mine. I thought I could finally breathe. And then I heard my husband's voice, low and calculating, his mother laughing behind him. They were talking about me, plotting against me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I froze. How could the people I trusted the most betray me so easily? I realized in that moment my life was about to change, and not in the way they expected. My name is Emily Carter. I am 32 years old, and until recently, I believed my life was stable, predictable, and safe. I live in a modest suburban neighborhood in Ohio, in a house that I had worked hard to make ours a place filled with light, laughter, and memories I thought were mine to keep. My husband, Jason Carter, is 35. To the outside world, he seems charming, dependable, and generous, the kind of man everyone admires. But beneath the surface, he hides a side I would come to know, too well a side that plots, manipulates, and deceives. Jason grew up in a family that prized appearances above honesty, where his mother, Diane Carter, always reminded him that power and control mattered more than truth or loyalty. Diane is in her early 60s, tall, with icy blue eyes that never miss a detail. She has a voice that can be soft and soothing one moment, then sharp and cutting the next. I always tried to be kind to her, to earn her approval, but it was never enough. She watched my every move with quiet scrutiny, judging me silently and speaking only when it suited her, often sowing doubt in Jason's mind without him even realizing it. I remember that morning like it was yesterday. I had spent weeks preparing to finalize the sale of my small art studio, the one I had poured my soul into for years. Today I would finally close the deal, and with that money I could pay off debts, breathe freely, and plan a future for myself. As I walked into the notary office, the winter sunlight fell across the polished floors, warm and comforting. I felt a sense of triumph. For once, I was in control. I thought nothing could go wrong. The notary, a middle-aged man named Robert, smiled as he handed me the signed documents. I could hear my own heartbeat, a steady rhythm of hope and accomplishment. I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, the faint scent of coffee from a nearby cafe mixing with the cold breeze. My chest swelled with pride and relief. I was finally free, I thought. I was finally in charge of my own life. That illusion shattered the moment I returned home. I parked in the driveway, expecting the usual greeting from Jason. A hug, maybe a playful comment about my excitement. Instead, I heard voices low, hushed, conspiratorial. I paused, straining to hear. Jason's voice, smooth and deliberate, mixed with Diane's soft laughter. My stomach twisted. My mind raced as I pieced together what they were saying, the words cutting sharper than any blade. They were planning against me, plotting to take away everything I had just fought to secure. I stepped closer to the window, my hands trembling. The sight that met my eyes made my blood run cold. Jason was standing near the kitchen, leaning casually, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. Diane, poised behind him, seemed to glow with satisfaction at whatever scheme they were plotting. The betrayal was immediate, visceral. The people I trusted most, the people I loved, were working together to undermine me. I could not breathe. My heart pounded so loudly that I feared they would hear it through the walls. I knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same. The life I had envisioned, the freedom I had just fought for, was under threat from the very people I had believed would protect it. I felt small, powerless, and yet a fire ignited within me, a need for justice, or retribution, for the kind of revenge that would leave no doubt about who held the power now. I did not yet know how I would respond, but one thing was certain: I could not stay silent. I could not let them win. And that is when I started watching, listening, and planning, though I had no idea how far this betrayal would reach or how deep the wounds of deception could cut. My life had become a chessboard, and I realized that if I wanted to survive, I would have to think 10 moves ahead. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you loved, you know the pain cuts deeper than any wound. Today's story is about deception, manipulation, and the moment when I realized I could no longer stay silent. What happened next changed everything, and it is the kind of revenge that will make you feel the satisfaction deep in your bones. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, okay? Because you are about to witness a story where betrayal meets justice. And the tables are turned in the most unforgettable way. The days that followed were a study in deception and duplicity. Every interaction with Jason felt carefully scripted, his smiles hiding knives, his words dripping with subtle control. At first, I tried to ignore the signs, hoping I was imagining things, that my fears were a product of stress and exhaustion. But each passing day made it impossible to deny the truth. Diane, his mother, became a constant presence in our home. Her visits framed as concern, but always carrying an undercurrent of manipulation. She offered advice that seemed helpful on the surface, but was laced with subtle jabs, questioning my decisions, my competence, and my worth. One afternoon, I came home from a long day at the art studio, expecting the comfort of home. I walked into the living room and froze. Jason was sitting on the sofa, casually scrolling through his phone, while Diane leaned over, her hand brushing his arm lightly. Their laughter echoed in the room, but it was hollow, almost predatory. I felt like an intruder in my own life. They began to make suggestions, or rather, orders disguised as suggestions. Jason mentioned that I should consider selling the house and moving closer to his mother, citing convenience and family unity. Diane chimed in, her tone sweet but sharp, implying that I was overreacting to trivial matters, that I was too emotional, too sensitive. Every word was a calculated push to destabilize me, to make me doubt my own judgment. I tried to confront Jason, to ask him directly what was happening, but he was skilled at deflection. His words were smooth, persuasive, designed to make me feel guilty for questioning him. He made me feel selfish for even considering that they could be plotting against me. Diane, ever the silent observer, nodded occasionally, her gaze sharp, like a hawk watching its prey. I realized that together, they were a perfect storm of manipulation, a team working to erode my confidence and sense of reality. One evening, I discovered a text on Jason's phone, a message from Diane, outlining their plan in detail. My hands shook as I read the words. They were planning to take control of the studio I had built, to sell assets I had worked for, to leave me with nothing. The betrayal hit like a freight train. The person I had trusted with my life, the person I had shared my hopes and fears with, was orchestrating my downfall alongside his mother. The room seemed to close in on me. I could feel my chest tighten, my mind racing with questions I did not yet have answers to. Every interaction became a minefield. Jason would compliment me, then follow it with a subtle insult that left me questioning my abilities. Diane would offer advice, then use it as ammunition to undermine my decisions. They were relentless, and I began to feel trapped in a life that was no longer my own. The house I had once considered a sanctuary now felt like a cage, with two predators controlling every aspect of my existence. Sleep became impossible. I lay awake at night, replaying their conversations, their words, their sly glances. I could not escape the feeling that they were always watching, always calculating. The sense of powerlessness was suffocating, yet beneath it all, a small ember of determination flickered. I would not be their victim forever. I would find a way to turn the tables, to reclaim my life and my dignity. But for now, I had to endure, observe, and understand the depth of their deception. The tension escalated with every passing day, the stakes growing higher, the betrayal sharper. I realized that my fight was no longer about money or property. It was about proving that I could survive, that I could outsmart them, and that I would not be broken. The chessboard was set, the pieces moving against me, but I would find the strategy that would allow me to strike back. I remember the night it all became too much. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Under Diane's deliberate footsteps, I had spent the entire day managing calls, invoices, and schedules for my studio, doing everything I could to stay afloat, only to return home and be met with Jason and Diane's calculated smiles and sharp comments. That evening, Diane had the audacity to suggest that I was too emotional to make sound business decisions, that perhaps it was better if Jason took over the financial matters entirely. Her words were coated in honey, but every syllable was a knife to my confidence. I sank into the armchair, my hands gripping the fabric so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Jason leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. He said nothing, letting Diane's words land like bricks, watching my reaction with a detached satisfaction that made my blood boil. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, a mix of fear, anger, and disbelief. How could the people I trusted most take such pleasure in my humiliation? I tried to speak, to defend myself, but the words caught in my throat. Every sentence I formed seemed inadequate, powerless against their relentless attack. Diane's laughter, soft but cruel, echoed in my ears, and I realized in that moment that I had been underestimating their cunning. This was not mere manipulation. This was a campaign, executed with patience, precision, and cruelty. I rose from the chair, shaking, my mind racing. I could feel the heat of anger spreading through me, a fire I had not felt in years. Fear and doubt had dominated me for too long. I had tried to stay calm, rational, and accommodating, hoping they would see reason, hoping they would relent. But they had no intention of stopping. They thrived on my submission, on my silence, on my belief that I would not fight back. The breaking point came when Diane, with her signature icy smile, suggested that I sell my studio to cover family expenses and avoid unnecessary stress. The words hit me like a physical blow. My studio, the place I had built from scratch, the place that had been my sanctuary and my escape, was under threat. All the hours, the sacrifices, the dreams I had poured into it traduced to a suggestion from a woman who had never earned any of it. I felt my knees weaken, and for a moment I imagined surrendering, walking away, letting them take it all. But that vision made my stomach twist with disgust. I realized that if I gave in, I would be powerless forever, trapped in a life dictated by their cruelty and manipulation. The fear that had kept me silent shattered in that instant, replaced by clarity, determination, and rage. I could feel a shift inside me, a mental pivot that changed everything. I would no longer allow Jason and Diane to dictate my life. I would no longer let them enjoy the satisfaction of my compliance. I would fight back, and I would do so strategically with precision and patience. Their underestimation of me would become their greatest mistake. I spent that night awake, pacing the living room, listening to the quiet hum of the house, and planning. Every detail mattered, every word Jason said, every glance Diane threw, every subtle maneuver they had used to destabilize me. I began taking notes, mentally charting their routines, weaknesses, and patterns. I realized that revenge was not just an option, it was a necessity. And it would have to be methodical, cinematic, and undeniable. By dawn, the decision was crystal clear. I would reclaim everything they tried to take, not with rage alone, but with intelligence, strategy, and patience. I had been pushed to the edge, and from that edge I would rise stronger, more focused, and ready to turn their betrayal into the sweetest form of justice. The fire inside me would no longer smolder. It would blaze. I did not rush into action. That was the first rule I set for myself. Jason and Diane thrived on impulsive reactions. They expected tears, panic, and emotional outbursts. I would give them none of that. Instead, I became quiet, observant, calculated. Every morning, I smiled, made coffee, and acted as if nothing had changed. But inside, I was building something dangerous, something precise. The first step was information. Power always begins with knowledge. I started tracking Jason's routines, his meetings, his phone habits, and his finances. I memorized when he left the house, when Diane visited, and when they thought I was distracted. At night, when Jason slept, I listened to his breathing and studied his phone when he left it unattended. I did not touch it yet. I only learned its patterns, 'cause timing would be everything. Then I created copies of every document that mattered. Deeds, contracts, studio ownership papers, financial statements, stored them digitally in a private cloud account that Jason had no access to. I printed physical copies and hid them in a safety deposit box at a bank across town. Every piece of my life that could be used against me, I secured, quietly, permanently. Diane underestimated technology. That was her weakness. She believed manipulation worked best face to face. So I let her talk. I let her explain. I let her reveal herself without realizing she was doing it. I recorded conversations on my phone whenever she spoke about finances or control. Her voice was calm, confident, careless. She believed I was still broken. She was wrong. Jason began slipping. Overconfidence always comes before collapse. He spoke more openly around me, assuming I was too afraid to challenge him. He discussed transferring assets. He joked about me being too emotional to notice anything important. Every word was evidence. Every laugh was a confession. My heart pounded every time I captured something new, not from fear, from power. The next step was legal. I scheduled a private consultation with a lawyer recommended by a friend. I told Jason I was visiting a supplier. Instead, I walked into a glass office with shaking hands and walked out with control. The lawyer listened carefully, quietly. Then he smiled and said something that changed everything. "They are not as smart as they think." That sentence echoed in my mind for days. Together, we built a strategy. Jason and Diane were attempting financial manipulation. That meant exposure would destroy them legally and socially. I was not just preparing revenge, was preparing a public unraveling. The final step was execution. And execution required patience. I waited until Diane convinced Jason to initiate the asset transfer. I waited until they believed they were winning, till their arrogance became visible, until they grew careless. Then, one evening, I sent anonymous copies of their recorded conversations to Jason's business partner, another to their family attorney, another to the company accountant. The ripple effect was immediate. Phones started ringing. Jason's confidence cracked. His voice sharpened. Diane became restless. Her composure fractured. I watched it unfold from the kitchen, stirring tea like nothing was happening. While their empire began collapsing behind closed doors, but I was not finished. I filed my own legal motion the next morning. Full evidence, full documentation, full protection. The lawyer said the case was airtight. Jason could not touch my studio. Diane could not influence the outcome. They had exposed themselves too completely. That was the moment I realized revenge was not about destruction, it was about reclamation. The tension in the house changed. Jason stopped pretending. Diane stopped smiling. They knew something had shifted. They just did not know how deep it went, and I let them feel it. I began standing straighter, speaking calmly, meeting their eyes. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped apologizing. Silence became my weapon. It terrified them more than screaming ever could. The storm was already moving. I just had not seen the lightning yet. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, almost unassumingly. The morning sun poured through the living room windows, casting a warm, golden glow over the house that had once felt like a prison. I moved through it calmly, deliberately, each step measured, each gesture controlled. Jason and Diane were oblivious, confident that their plan was still unfolding according to their design. They had no idea that the tables had already turned. It began with a phone call. Jason's business partner was on the line, his tone tight, urgent. He read excerpts from the recordings I had made, detailing every scheme, every whispered conversation, every plan they had discussed to undermine me. Diane's voice, soft and honeyed, rang out on the recording, laughing at my expense. Jason froze mid-sentence, his jaw tightening as the partner enumerated the legal ramifications. I watched from the kitchen, pretending to sip coffee, while my pulse raced not with fear, but with anticipation. Diane arrived moments later, expecting a casual morning. She noticed nothing until the first texts began arriving on her phone. Legal notices, emails from accountants, confirmations from attorneys, all evidence of their exposure. Her expression shifted subtly at first, a flicker of unease in her icy blue eyes. Then it widened into horror as the reality sank in. Her hands trembled as she read the first notice, her voice caught in her throat. Jason, standing beside her, finally turned to face me, confusion and panic written across his features. "You did this?" he spat, the words sharp but incredulous. I set the coffee cup down and met his gaze steadily, calm, collected. I said nothing. I let the silence speak louder than any accusation could. Diane's gasp broke the tension, a sound that echoed through the room and reverberated deep inside me. Her composure, the carefully constructed mask she had worn for decades, crumbled. She could not look at me without seeing the storm she had helped create. The legal notices continued to pile up, each one more damning than the last. Jason's phone rang repeatedly, each call another reminder of their unraveling. His voice, once smooth and commanding, became clipped, defensive, almost frantic. Diane's shoulders sagged, her movements jerky and ungraceful, a stark contrast to her usual poise. I watched them, noting every flinch, every quiver, every silent scream hidden behind forced restraint. Then came the final blow. The lawyer I had secretly met weeks earlier arrived at the house, papers in hand outlining the full consequences of their actions. Diane's eyes widened further as the reality of financial exposure, legal liability, and social embarrassment hit her. Jason stammered, his words failing him entirely. My heart thudded in my chest, a mixture of adrenaline, relief, and triumph. The tension that had gripped me for months melted in an instant, replaced by a clarity that was almost euphoric. I stepped closer to them, my voice calm but firm. "This ends today. Everything you tried to take, manipulate, or control has been protected. Your schemes are exposed. Your plans have failed." Jason opened his mouth to argue, but the room was deafeningly silent, filled only with the weight of justice settling over them. Diane covered her face, shaking, a single tear betraying the pride and control she had clung to for so long. The humiliation was complete. The people who had tried to destroy me were powerless, and they knew it. I felt a release. I cannot describe years of anxiety, betrayal, and fear dissolving in that moment. My shoulders relaxed, my chest expanded as though I had been holding my breath for decades. Relief washed over me in waves, each one warmer, sweeter, and more validating than the last. The victory was not just legal or financial, it was deeply personal. It was the restoration of my dignity, my autonomy, and my sense of justice. I stood there for a long moment, watching them grasp the consequences of their arrogance. The house, once suffocating, felt expansive, filled with sunlight and clarity. I realized I had not only survived, but had reclaimed my life with strategy, patience, and resolve. And for the first time in months, I smiled, not a timid, fearful smile, but a full, unshakable one. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the moment I became untouchable. The days after the confrontation were quiet, almost eerily so. Jason and Diane withdrew into themselves, their presence in the house reduced to hushed whispers and avoidance. For the first time in months, I felt the freedom I had been fighting for, a lightness in my chest, a clarity in my mind, and a sharp sense of self that no one could undermine. I walked through my home and noticed things I had ignored in my anxiety. The sunlight reflecting off the hardwood floors, the faint smell of coffee in the kitchen, the way the wind rustled the trees outside. Each small detail was a reminder that my life was mine again. I spent hours reflecting on everything that had led me to this point. The betrayal had cut deep, deeper than I could have imagined. Jason, the person I had trusted with my heart, had chosen manipulation over love. Diane, a mother who should have guided with care, had wielded control as a weapon. Their actions were cruel, calculated, and relentless, but they had underestimated me. They had assumed fear and submission, yet they had met resilience and strategy instead. In this reflection, I realized that revenge is not simply about hurting those who wrong you. True revenge is reclamation, reclaiming your power, your dignity, and your sense of self. Every move I made, every observation, every calculated step was not driven solely by anger, but by the need to restore balance and ensure that justice was served. I understood now that patience is a weapon, knowledge is armor, and clarity is strength. I also realized that healing is not linear. The anger, the fear, and the frustration had served a purpose. They ignited the fire I needed to act decisively. But in the aftermath, I felt something new. Calm, quiet confidence that I could navigate the world with clear eyes and steady hands. Betrayal had been a brutal teacher, but it had given me lessons I could never have learned any other way. I had learned to trust my instincts, to observe before reacting, and to recognize that my voice mattered, even when others tried to silence it. My studio, the place I had built with my hands and heart, now stood as a symbol of resilience. Every canvas, every brushstroke, every detail was proof that I could create something lasting despite the attempts of others to destroy me. The freedom I had fought for was tangible, not just in documents and legal victories, but in the air I breathed, the space I occupied, and the decisions I made daily. I also understood boundaries in ways I had never before. Trust is earned, not assumed, and people who wield power irresponsibly must be held accountable. My life was no longer dictated by fear or manipulation. I had set the terms, I had defined the rules, and most importantly, I had survived stronger than before. Looking back, I felt gratitude for my own resilience, for the fire that refused to die, for the courage to act when silence would have meant surrender. I had emerged not only victorious, but transformed, wiser, calmer, and unafraid to assert my worth. This is a story not just of betrayal, but of empowerment. It is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, clarity, strategy, and courage can restore what seems lost. And that true justice is not measured by the harm you inflict, but by the power you reclaim. If this story inspired you, hit the like button, share it in the comments, and subscribe for more gripping tales of betrayal, strategy, and justice. Tell us your own story of resilience. Your voice matters, and your strength can light the way for others.